Wai Hasquas, White Sinia Cocaine, Inchai, Squeeze Praset, Kins and Ike, Toka, he Colville's Kulau. Naha Putikuala, Ulta, Kasapi, he Yo Michum till Canada, Kuchus Lutkuala, Nakam Putikuala, Atsentincha, Nashi Slack, Rick. I'm going to get all emotional this morning, but the bugs are going to keep it real for me. I was just introducing myself and saying I was so glad that I was here. A long time ago, the Canadian government said, you know, we weren't here. They actually said we didn't exist. And it's ironic, you know, that was in 1956. It was the exact same year that they were doing the mapping for the Columbia River Treaty. We are the only people of Canada that have had a declaration of extinction. For those of you who keep up to politics and whatnot, have followed perhaps the Digital decision. And that's what they call a test case. And what our tribe did and our people have done has been a long time in the making. And we knew we would have one try, and that was it. That was all we would get, you know, through the court systems. And it's really hard. It doesn't make sense, you know, as a young person. I grew up in a family with my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my papa. And my great-grandmother was very political minded. She was a fluent speaker of our language, and she was also a council person at one point. And she delivered babies, and she helped people with medicine, and she did everything, as our elders did then, because you had to. But I grew up kind of unique in the way that I was one of the people that knew that we were declared extinct as a young child. And I didn't understand it. From the perspective of a 12-year-old, it just doesn't make sense. And I've thought about that as an adult, and I think about the social issues that we have as Indigenous people, and specifically for us as Sinixt people. And the story might be different, but the story's also the same. And it's about forced dislocation. And it's about being inconvenient. And it's about having a voice that is not popular to have. And, you know, I work with some folks on a thing right now. I don't know if it will happen, but it's a Columbia River Treaty tourism, you know, signage. And it gets really delicate. You know, people don't, they say they want to hear the story, but they don't want to hear the story. There's no smoking gun on, there's not a memo that is written that says you guys were declared extinct for whatever reason. All I have is that the same year that they were mapping for the Columbia River Treaty, they made a declaration of our extinction, and it doesn't make sense. A lot of Indigenous people have disappeared off the landscape, and there's no declaration of extinction. There's just a disappearance of a lost voice. And so when I come here and I see this painting and this artwork, it really moves me. It moves me on so many levels. Rick and I have been friends for a long time, and he's an amazing artist, as you can see. I like, there's a gallery in Spokane that carries his work a lot, and it's called the Marmot. And I like what Marshall says, because it makes sense. It's like Rick is educated as an artist, but if you know him, you know he's got a work ethic or a drive that is amazing. He lives and he breathes and he does art, and he has done this as long as I have known him. And when I knew him, he was already a very accomplished artist. He has traveled all over the United States with art, and he is one of the people not just, we're a confederation of 12 bands on the Colville Reservation, and we share a bloodline of Sinixt, but he is also Umatilla. And so the thing is though, he shines really bright for all of our confederation. For Sinixt people on the Colville Reservation, there are about 3,500. I think the exact number is like 3,681. I just got a new number, and that changes every day with those that are born and those that leave. But our confederation is about 10,000. And out of 10,000 of us, he is someone that makes us so proud. And the fact that he came up here to do this, not just because you guys don't carry the Seahawks game, but because, it's just a long ways to come. But he was talking about some things on the way up that really, like I'm not going to tell the whole thing because I torture stories and stuff, but, dreams that he's had about this landscape. We always tease each other because he comes from the side of our reservation that's very like a desert, and I come from like a place that will remind you a lot of this place without these amazing, huge mountains. I always have said I'm a mountain woman, because of where I live, and we pick huckleberries and we do all these things that we've done culturally and traditionally. But when I come up here, I'm reminded that I'm truly a mountain woman, and that I come from this water. This river is important to our people. As my friend Virgil Seymour said, he said, with everything that's happened with our people, we never left this river. We never left it. And if you look at the numbers of Sinixt people, they have kind of a formula that 80% of us went to Inchelium, or Inchelium. It's called the place by the water. That's what it translates into. But then the other 20 went into the Suwekmech, into the Suknakain, and into the Katanacha. And that was survival. And it was also a natural thing that we always built relations. And those are the things that we have to focus on, is building relations amongst each other, amongst the settler communities, amongst the world. I don't want to sound like I'm egocentric or that we are so much smarter or anything. We are not. We've struggled a lot as human beings and as people, but we have an inherent connection to the land. I was having breakfast this morning and we were talking about that connection. My late husband, he was the chairman of our tribe before he left us, but he had a filter that he would ask himself every day. Stimi mis chaskal hisilk, what is best for the water? Stimi mis chaskal hitumhula, what is best for the land? Stimi mis chaskal hiskelu kam hitumyu, what is best for the things that are wild, and what is best for the people? And that was the order in shifting through those things. What is best for the land? We have a name that we call each other. Oftentimes you'll hear Indigenous people from the Salish, interior Salish, that we call each other Skelu, or we'll call Skelu. Without going too in depth about where that comes from, but a little bit into depth where that comes from. In our Chaptik, in our old stories, there are different times of people. And the first time of people is called Stelskelu. That's the first people. You hear Skelu in the end of it. That Stelch is the first ones that came. And we came to the animal people, and our stories reflect that. And they're not like fables. They're like where we came from. And I used to wonder about, I just saw a thing where they talked about the first human prince. Did you guys see that at all? The ghost prince? But it really calls into question this whole land bridge thing, which has never made sense to me. Like, and it still doesn't. And like I said, I'm the first person to admit I don't have a scientific mind. I don't have that kind of background in archaeology or any of those things, but it doesn't make sense to me that we would have a world that is, it has the same air, it has the same water, it has the same basic elements, but that this continent would have had to travel across a land bridge. Why didn't we just come from the land? That's what our stories say. But in that Stel Scala, we are the first people. And we come from the animal people. And the second people is called the Hatama Scala. Hatama comes from ha, which is sacred, something sacred. And so we called them the sacred people because you would hear stories about them being able to like leave in their mind and travel or know things, how they were coming, or to stop the weather or change the weather. You know, people in deep grief could change fire. They could change whatever they needed. You just needed to have the sumich behind you to do those things. And those people knew those things, and they were called Hatama Skelu. We are called Autama Skelu. This time of people is called Autama, and that's the last people. There's one more group of entities that come after us in our creation stories, and they're called Kwasich. In our language, Sich is something that's new, but Kwa is something that's different. But if you were really listening and following along, you'll notice it doesn't say Skelu in it. It says Kwasich. The thing I like to point out about this story, my elder, we talked about this, and he says, you know, one thing that we get wrong, or many people get wrong, is that Skelu part. That's not just Indigenous people. Those are the people who remember that they are ripped from the land. That's what Skelu really ends up coming down from, is being pulled from the land. And so when we forget that, he said that there will be no more Skelu. And I come from a country now where I absolutely have someone I point out as saying who is not Skelu. And that's Donald Trump. You know, he's a really good example. You know, he's funny, right? But it's true. Like someone that is so disconnected from the land that doesn't understand those connections. And that's how we disappear as human beings. And so I tell this story because I talk about the amplification of Indigenous voices and how important that is. I think culturally, we listen more. I think culturally that's part of how we are. But I also think historically and through what has happened to us as people, we've been told to shut up a lot. Because no one wants to talk about the inconvenience of bringing salmon home. No one wants to talk about, you know, straight wilderness areas that don't include anything, so that caribou and grizzly and that kind of the land, the Temu, can live. And they need to live without us. But when we start to forget that we're just a part of this, that's when we will disappear. I look at this painting, these paintings. Right now I can see it in the reflection behind us, and it's not random people. If you know Ric's work, I've said this before, you know what I love about his work is like, it's unique and beautiful and colorful. It's not a stereotype of Indigenous work. So oftentimes we're put into like, and he'll joke about it too, but like really soft colors, muted colors, beautiful landscapes. And he'll just come at things with hard, bold colors. And I like Madeline up here with the blue face, you know, like in our beadwork, in our old beadwork, you'd see like horses or antelope or deer. They're in different colors. They're not brown. They're in all the colors. And I love how that reflects. But I love that these are our people. She was the daughter of Aropachen. And then Ric's family is right here. I don't know, he's gonna get mad at me maybe. Well, no, I think it was in the article, and then there's him when he was little. And I've never seen him have work where he's put himself in it like that. If you watch his work, I'm going to do a tell here. But if you watch his work, oftentimes you'll see his rings on people, like the images of those that he paints, but you'll never see him. And if you do see him, you want it, because he just doesn't do it. And then right behind me, we have one of my ancestors, Kinkanawa, and he was a salmon chief. And then over here, this man in the tie, you have him, he's Alex Christian. In the Christian family, they fought really hard, to keep the last hope of a reserve for our people down at a place we call Capitals. It's at the confluence of the Kootenai and the Columbia River. And that is my son and my grandchildren's great-great-great-grandfather. And then we have Kinkanawa Old. And then we have little Alec. And then up here in the pink shirt, I want you to really think about her. Her name was Adeline. And there's a song up here about Cultist Jim. And her husband, that was her husband that was murdered. And now that place is honored by Hill Creek. That was the person who murdered her husband. She was a young wife. But these aren't just images. These are people. These are stories. And she's actually my other son's great-great-grandmother. I have a photo. She lived to be over 100 years. He was a baby, and there's a 5th-generation picture. She's in it, and he's in it. And it's funny because, not funny, haha, but funny, ironic, I thought she had Alzheimer's when I met her, because all she did was speak Skaluk. She only spoke in the language. She was over 100 years old, and so you just go with it, right? But then in reading stories, they talked about how when that incident happened, they didn't provide a translator for her. She didn't speak English. And we sit here and we think about that, like the length of time that our language has left this land. It seems forever, but to us it's not. It doesn't mean that it's not endangered. It's so endangered right now. It's something that we work at all the time. Because that language is a connection to who we are. Like I said, words don't just mean like when I said the generations of people, they specifically have a meaning. The first people, the sacred people, the last people, the different things. Everything has a meaning. I could sit here and talk to you about what mother means, what father means, what it means for a young woman to call her dad Mistam, the one who will provide everything. Or a boy, when he calls his dad Li'u, to put yourself last. All of our words, they have meaning. And so when you think about the importance of language, Indigenous languages, not just here, but globally, because they hold answers, they hold keys to who was here, but more importantly, the knowledge that is kept in the land from a millennia of living on the land. Anyway, I don't know what time it is. Well, the thing is, though, there are some things that I wanted to really emphasize. And part of it was what an honor, and that's what that whole piece is, that Ric did this work. But also that this work is hanging here, that you invited this work to come here, and that you want to know more about it, or you wouldn't be standing here in all these bugs. I know it. I'm asked a lot of questions about the Digital decision and how that case went. And that's part of, I don't believe anything happens for accidents. It's just sometimes we don't understand the connections. So this case started as I said, the actual case, the thinking about the case was in 98, 99. This is when our people started getting together and saying, how can we address the crown? How can we do that when we don't exist? You think, like I said, you think it would be easy. Like, it's stupid. You're extinct? Like, that doesn't make sense. And the way that our blue cards, that status cards here, our Indigenous record of who we are, mine says, Rick says, Arrow Lakes Indian. Like, it's real specific, because it got, the Anglified name for us is Arrow Lakes. Where are we? You know, like, you just can't, I didn't even need my tupia. You know, honestly, I needed a map to go, what? Because there were people in Inchelium that were like, we're Lakes Indians, because a lot of times people will just say, you're Lakes. But the reality is that it was really hard to engage with the government and say who we are. And it's not just hard for us, it's hard for all of the First Nations in BC. And getting my perspective as someone that was not raised in BC, what they did to Indigenous people up here was they gave them tiny, tiny little reserves. Like I live on a reservation or a reserve. It takes 2 hours to drive either way. There's 12 different bands, 12 different nations on that reserve. Okay, now I'm snorting bugs. But here, they gave them little tiny dots. It doesn't seem like I see too many confederations. But they let them claim to hunt and fish in whatever they say the territory is. And so what it did was it set up Indigenous people to fight with each other. And it's going to call out the government on that. It was their lack of caring, their lack of wanting to deal with who were First Nations of a certain area. Right now, we are sitting on Sinixt Timhulau that was also used by the Suepmich. That's just the reality. Sukanakanes and the Ketanaha also claim this territory. We don't have stories of that. We have stories of the Suepmich here and us here. But not only do we have these stories, the first explorers have these stories. David Thompson, Ross, DeSmet. We have our historian over here. He could just the amount of evidence that we had to corroborate, not just from our Indigenous voices, but the voices of the first explorers and settlers. It gets confusing too, because we have people that other 20% that went into those other territories. We share a language with the Sukanakain called Inselkchin, Si'il or Silks. It's a language, it's not a people. But oftentimes people get confused and say, oh, you're Silks. That'd be like me saying, oh, you guys are Americans. I mean, it's confusing, but First Nations people are left to deal with these kinds of things. And it's terrible too, because I think it is the First Nations that were here on this Timhulau, this land right here, that have an elevated connection to it and love for it. Going back to driving up here with Rick and that dream that he had of this landscape. That's not the first time when I brought people up that they have dreams or they have experiences or things that happen. I think of it like Jerusalem. I don't want to step on anybody's culture or anybody's history, but the stories that I hear about people going back to Jerusalem. You guys live in Jerusalem for us. This is how it feels when we get to come home. And this is why it was so important and moving to me when Rick did this. And I think that part of it was our friendship, but I think part of it was because this is our land. Anyway, it wouldn't be right, I think, not to honor that. And I was gonna sing a song to start, but I wanted to sing a song at the end, because you know, one thing about Revelstoke that I love when I come up here, I always see the grizzly. And, hey Rick, will you hold this? Huma. My killer dog's not going anywhere. But, I know what he's like, But I had to kind of make this short for me, because I'm a little shorter. And I'm super blind, super blind. And that's for you, because you're awesome. But I want to sing a song just for our ancestors here. And when Miriam was talking about naming this, she was thinking like coming home. And there's a story, a chaptik, an old story that we have about Revelstoke. And I want you to remember that. Like, we have old stories. We have stories. Our people have heard stories about this place that have never come here. But what I find interesting about this is it's called, it's the Bringing Back to Life story or song. And it was also called Coyote's Traveling Song. And this isn't the time of year to tell these stories, but the base of this, because we tell our stories in the winter, but the base of this story is that Coyote brought his wife from the bottom of our territory up to Revelstoke. Even that story talks about the reaches of our territory. It goes from Kettle Falls, the fishery at Kettle Falls, to Revelstoke. But this is the coming back to, you know, the bringing back to life. And in our culture, and I never do this, I never ask people to stand up, but I'm asking you to stand up, not for me or this song, but for these ancestors, because they're the ones that got to come home. Rick brought them home, and y'all brought them home. Yo, 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 oh, yo, oh, yo, 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 oh, yo, oh, yo, 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 oh, yo, oh, yo, 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 oh, yo, oh, yo, 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 oh, yo, oh, yo, yo, Why limlam kulanchu no limlam tupia, limlam to all of you for listening to this, and limlam to everyone. And I'm going to throw this in too. I know you guys are probably local, but if you have not stayed in this hotel, you should. It's so cool. It's so cool. And I want to say limlip to Rick again, because it's a big deal. He's really a humble person, but if you'll Google him, you look at just a life of work. He's an amazing artist, and it is the kind of artist that it takes a lifetime to become. His work is amazing and beautiful, and we are so proud, you know, to have him. And I think he's going to talk about this or answer your questions or whatever. He'll probably ask you about the game. I don't know. Okay, anyway.